On a sunny day in April 1999, the world was shocked by the senseless murder of a beloved journalist and TV presenter, Jill Dando. The murder took place outside her own home in Fulham, London. Despite numerous investigations and trials, the case remains unsolved to this day, leaving many questions unanswered and conspiracies unproven.
Well, we have reason to believe that he's a maniac.
I don't accept the whole situation.
Stephen R. Bundy to die in the electric chair.
Brother and sister.
As a cadence of a beautiful daughter with an order
The murder of Jill Dando shocked the nation and sparked one of the most high-profile investigations in British criminal history. So let's dive deeper into the events leading up to her murder, the investigation that followed, and the possible theories surrounding her death. Jill had a bright future ahead of her. She had recently become engaged to her boyfriend, Alan Farthing, and was planning her wedding. She was also involved in various charitable causes, and was known for her kind and compassionate nature. Jill Dando was also a well-known, highly respected British journalist and television presenter. Born in Weston-super-Mare in 1961, Dando began her career at the age of 21 as a newsreader and presenter for the BBC Radio Devon. Her talent and dedication quickly earned her a reputation as one of the most promising journalists of her time. Throughout her career, Dando hosted several popular TV shows, including BBC's Crime Watch and Holiday, and became a household name in the UK. She was admired for her down-to-earth personality, professionalism, and commitment to raising awareness about important issues. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando left her home in Fulham to go to the BBC Television Centre in White City. She had just returned from a holiday in Italy with her fiancé, Alan Farthing, a consultant gynecologist. As she approached her front door at around 11:30 a.m., she was shot once in the head from point-blank range. Her body was discovered by a neighbor who had heard the gunshot and rushed to her aid, but it was too late. Dando was pronounced dead at the scene. This murder was unimaginable, unthinkable. The news of this actually shocked the world, with fans and colleagues struggling to come to terms with the loss of such a talented, kind-hearted journalist. Right off the bat, suspicions were raised immediately in every direction imaginable, truly showing that the investigators didn't even know where to begin. Despite this, it was not up for debate that they hit the ground running on this case, launching something that would truly become a global mystery. Believe me, the investigation into Jill Dando's murder was truthfully one of the largest and most complex in British history. The Metropolitan Police initially had no leads or suspects and launched an extensive investigation that involved over 2,500 interviews and the analysis of countless pieces of evidence. Several theories emerged over the years, including the possibility that Dando was murdered by a stalker or a professional hitman hired by the Serbian mafia. Others speculated that the murder was linked to her work on the Crime Watch program, or her involvement in the campaign to ban handguns in the UK following the Dunblane massacre. First, let's truly concentrate on the crime scene during that deceivingly bright day in 1999. The murder of Jill Dando took place just after 11:30 a.m. on a quiet residential street in Fulham. According to witnesses, a man was seen walking away from the scene shortly after the gunshots were heard. The suspect was described as a white man in his mid-30s, with a stocky build and short brown hair. He was wearing a light-colored jacket and was carrying a bag. Forensic evidence collected from the scene suggested that the killer had used a handgun and that the bullet had been fired from a very close range. Police also found a spent bullet casing and a single footprint on the ground. The evidence suggested that the killer had been lying in wait for Jill Dando and had followed her to her home. She had just returned from a shopping trip and was about to enter her home when the kill took place. The shot was heard by several neighbors, who immediately called emergency services. Dando's fiancé, Alan Farthing, who was a doctor, rushed to the scene and attempted to revive her, but she was pronounced dead a few minutes later. The crime scene was immediately sealed off, and forensic teams began a detailed examination of the area. The police discovered a single bullet casing at the scene, which had later been found to be fired from a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, a reliable and accurate firearm that had been used by military and police forces around the world for many years. The gun had been modified to make it more difficult to trace. It had been fitted with a homemade silencer and a serial number that had been filed off. This made it extremely difficult for the police to identify the owner or trace the gun back to its source. After the murder, the police conducted an extensive search for the gun, but it was never found. Some theories suggest that the gun may have been smuggled into the country, specifically for the purpose of killing Jill Dando. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, police had very little to go on in terms of suspects. However, over the coming days and weeks, they had received hundreds of calls from members of the public and began to investigate several leads. One of the most promising leads was the sighting of a suspicious man near Jill Dando's home on the day of the murder. The man, who was later identified as a local loner named Barry George, was seen acting suspiciously in the area around the time of the murder. He was arrested and charged with the murder of Jill Dando, but he always maintained his innocence.
Jill Dando.
At trial, the prosecution argued that Barry George had been obsessed with Jill Dando and had stalked her in the weeks leading up to her murder. They presented forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene, including gunshot residue found on his coat and a single particle of firearms discharge found in his pocket. However, the defense team argued that the forensic evidence was unreliable and that Barry George had been the victim of a miscarriage of justice. Despite their arguments, Barry George was convicted of Jill Dando's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Then, in 2008, his conviction was overturned on appeal, and he was acquitted of the murder. The Court of
We're
Appeal
especially disappointed for Jill's family and friends. However, we accept and respect the decision of the court.
The Court of Appeal ruled that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that there were doubts about his guilt. During his trial, the prosecution argued that George had a fixation with celebrities and had been stalking women in the area. They also presented forensic evidence, including gunshot residue found in his clothing and a single fiber on his coat that matched a fiber found on Dando's clothing. However, the defense team argued that the forensic evidence was flawed and that George's fixation with celebrities did not necessarily make him a killer. They also presented evidence from witnesses who claimed to have seen a man running away from the scene who did not match George's description. The Court of Appeal overturned George's conviction and ordered a retrial. However, the retrial never took place, as the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to pursue the case due to a lack of new evidence. After his acquittal, Barry George maintained his innocence and claimed that he had been wrongly accused. He later took legal action against the Metropolitan Police, claiming that they had mishandled the investigation and that his wrongful conviction had ruined his life. The case was settled out of court, with George receiving a significant payout. Other theories and suspects have also been put forward over the years. Some have suggested that the killing was a work of a hitman, hired by a disgruntled viewer of the BBC, specifically Crime Watch. Maybe the murder was linked to her work investigating the Balkan conflict in the 1990s, or her involvement exposing a pedophile ring within the BBC. Another theory that has been suggested is that Jill's murder was linked to her private life. At the time of her death, she was engaged to a gynecologist named Alan Farthing, who went on to become a doctor to the royal household. Some have suggested that the murder may have been carried out by a jealous boyfriend or another person connected to Jill's personal life. These are the most underlooked theories revolving around the case. But as British society moves forward, its members' eyes are open to the many layers of corruption of which the British government is composed. A common argument here is that Jill's interconnected web of people through work and personal life really shows that even though she was not living the life of a multimillionaire, she was close enough to them in status, and around them enough to potentially get in the way. So the idea that Dando was taken out because of her coverage of a complex, wealthy global criminal system is not so far-fetched. Perhaps this precisely is a forever hidden hit from a higher-up member of society. Would you put it past the elite in today's world? One of the main focuses of the investigation was the forensic evidence found at the crime scene. This included the bullet case found near Dando's body, as well as gunshot residue and fibers found on Barry George's clothing. Forensic experts also examined Dando's clothing and hair for any trace of evidence that could help identify the killer. The police also interviewed hundreds of witnesses in the days and weeks after the murder. This included neighbors who had heard the gunshot, people who had seen a man running from the scene, and those who had seen Dando in the days leading up to her death. Witness statements helped police to create a timeline of events leading up to the murder and to develop a picture of who may have been responsible. They also used suspect profiling techniques to help identify potential suspects in the case. This involved analyzing the evidence and witness statements to create a psychological profile of the killer. The profile helped investigators to focus their efforts on individuals who matched the profile. Undoubtedly, work was being done to find the killer, but nothing gave lead. Jill Dando's funeral was held on May 14, 1999, at Clarence Park Baptist Church in Weston-super-Mare, the town where she grew up. The funeral was attended by family, friends, and colleagues from the BBC, as well as members of the public who came to pay their respects. The service was conducted by Reverend David Hunt, who had known Jill since she was a child. Many of Jill's colleagues from the BBC, including newsreader Hugh Edwards, paid tribute to her during the service. Music was provided by a choir, and the service ended with the hymn, Jerusalem. After the funeral, Jill was buried in the Worrell Cemetery in Weston-super-Mare. Her grave is marked by a simple headstone with her name, date of birth, and date of death. In terms of her estate, Jill left behind a significant fortune, estimated to be around 1.2 million British pounds. She had made a will, which specified that her estate should be divided between her family and various charities. Alan Farthing also inherited a portion of her estate. So despite the extensive investigation and her near-celebrity status, Jill Dando's killer has never been caught. And despite the many theories that have been put forward over the years, the truth behind Jill Dando's murder remains elusive. I believe her tragic murder serves as a reminder of the importance of closure for victims and their loved ones, and of the need for continued efforts to prevent violence and crime in our society. Also, while the case of Jill Dando's murder remains unsolved, the investigation and subsequent trials have raised important questions about the effectiveness of police investigations and the fairness of the criminal justice system. They have furthermore highlighted the impact of media coverage and public opinion on high-profile cases, and the potential dangers of rushing to judgment without significant evidence. Today, the Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science at University College London, established in 2001 in memory of Jill Dando, continues to research and develop new ways to prevent and solve crimes. The Institute's work focuses on using science and technology to improve crime prevention, investigation, and criminal justice. However, an eerie feeling still creeps. Even though her legacy has garnered positive attention, could there be living people well aware of the truth regarding Dando's tragic death? We are left with more questions than answers. Who killed Jill Dando, and why? Will the truth ever be uncovered, or will this case remain a mystery forever? If you enjoyed our deep dive into this story, please subscribe to our channel for everything true crime.